steady, and with the truth out front. 1 digit. That's all. A single number slipped and an entire ridgeline glowed orange like a cut from a hot knife. 6 names, 6 families. The paper called it an operational failure. My file called it dispatcher error. For 20 years, I let everyone, including myself, believe I had killed good people by getting a coordinate wrong. Tonight, I'm going to tell you why that isn't the truth. Tonight, I'm going to turn on an old tape recorder that someone mailed to me in a plain manila envelope, and you'll hear what I heard. The sound of a voice I wasn't supposed to hear layered into my frequency, giving my fire crew the wrong place at the exact wrong second. If you're watching me in your kitchen or on your phone in bed, welcome to my small, stubborn corner of the world. My name is Lorraine Walker, but the only people who ever call me that are insurance agents and medical receptionists. Everyone else calls me Rain. I'm 71. I live at the dry edge of Oregon, where the sagebrush looks silver before sunrise, and I used to dispatch wildfire crews from a concrete bunker with map walls and stale coffee that could make a spoon stand straight up. That's the beginning most people want, the part that sounds like a line out of a movie. But stories like this don't spool from a single dramatic moment. They leak out of 100 small ones. A Christmas gift of a folding map that smells faintly of glue, a habit of counting steps from the back door to the truck in the dark, a boy who ties his bootlaces like his father, a tape recorder forgotten in a desk drawer for 20 years and then not. If you stick with me, I promise I'll stick with you. No flourishes I don't earn. If you're still with me near the end, I'll ask you for one small thing. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. I started in fire as a radio operator who got good with bearings because being good with bearings meant everything. You sit at a desk that faces a wall of topographic maps, and each line is an elevation, and each elevation is a place where the wind does something strange at 4 p.m. You keep a pad for timestamps, a pencil that's always sharp on one end, and a grease pencil that leaves bright, waxy marks on clear overlay sheets. A person imagines that the field is action and the office is safety. The truth is, you get your own kind of heat in dispatch. Heat that comes from knowing a pause can be a wound, and a wrong word can cut deeper than a chainsaw. I wasn't born to it. I married into it. I met my husband, Cal, in a town with 1 traffic light and 2 bars. He was a reporter for a weekly that ran on newsprint so thin the ink would come off on your fingers. He wore his shirts rolled at the sleeves and kept a notebook in his pocket, even when he wasn't on a story. The first time we talked, I told him what a Ridge Runner crew does on day 4 when their packs smell like extinguished matches and sweat. He didn't take notes for once. He listened. There's a difference between recording and listening. You learn it the way you learn a person's step on the porch. He loved the way my hands moved across a map. He used to say, "Your fingers know something before your head does." He was right. That's the only thing he was ever cocky about. We had our boy a few years later and called him Noah because it felt strong without being loud. He was that kind of kid too, quietly strong. He learned how to spot smoke long before he could write his name in a straight line. We kept a jar of pine cones by the back door because he liked to mark how different shapes burned. I should tell you that I was careful. This isn't a story about a mother who shrugged and said, "Do what you want." I told him about flare-ups and snags and how a nice breeze can turn into a death sentence on a south-facing slope. He listened, the way his father did. He remembered, the way I did. The summer I keep circling around is the one with the heat that snapped dry branches clean as glass. We had more lightning than rain, and more nights than sleep. If you've been through a season like that, the whole thing lives in your muscles. You can smell it long after the season is over, the way you carry a scent of ash in the fibers of a sweatshirt, even after you've washed it and hung it out under the big sky. The night the ridge went hot began ordinary. I poured coffee into a ceramic mug that has a chip on the rim I trace when I'm too tired to think. I said hello to the day shift on their way out, collected the log, and touched the pencil points to make sure they were ready. The radios chatter even when the room is quiet. It's like living beside a river. I logged an update from a crew east on the boundary, then another from the lookout west, then a pilot check-in that was sleepy and steady and made me smile. It had been 9 hours since the lightning rolled through, and the lightning was the kind that had you waiting for the other shoe to fall. At 2:13, we had a small column appear where no one expected it. Not far, but enough that you sit up straighter. The crew boss called in with a line like he was asking someone to pass the salt. That's how the best of them sound when things start to cook. They keep it calm so no one else goes stupid. I took his bearing, marked the map, copied his coordinates into my log, read them back, and then gave him an assignment at a draw below a stubby ridge. We were going to catch it fast. He said Roger, and that Roger had the kind of ease that says, you know your people and your people know you. Here's where the tape will matter later. I gave the assignment as clearly as I've ever said anything. I logged it. I circled it on the overlay sheet. I could find that dot in my sleep. 30 minutes later, they were not where I sent them. They were higher on the ridge, and the wind slipped through the saddle the way it does when it decides it doesn't care about you. The smoke inverted, then opened like a hand, and fire ran up a chute like a thing that had been waiting all year to wake up. I remember the sound of the crew boss when he realized what the wind was doing. Some people think the sound is panic. It isn't. Panic is loud and sloppy. What I heard that night is not panic. It is a professional noticing that death has walked into the room, taken a chair, and folded its hands. He asked for air support. I logged it. He asked a question without asking it. Can you get me out of here in time? I wish I could tell you I worked a miracle. I did my job. I kept the log so clean you could eat off it. I sent air from 3 towns. I watched the green map turn the kind of red that doesn't look like any red a person ever made. And then I wrote in my neat block letters what no one should have to write that many times. Silence. 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 In the morning, I did the thing you do when there are rules, and when rules feel like a frame you can hold yourself in so you don't fall over. I wrote an initial report. I sat at a table with men I knew by their boots and women I knew by the way they carried 2 coffees at once. I put my finger on a map and said, this is where I told him to go. Then a man in a shirt with a crisp collar said, that's not what your log says. He put my log down on the table and the number was different. 1 digit. Where I wrote 3, the log read 4. It changed the line across the map like someone had tilted the world. I took it on the chin because there was nowhere else for it to land. I left the room when they asked. I sat in the break room and stared at the dead plant by the window. People came in and didn't look at me, and then came in and did look at me, and then stopped coming in at all. By the end of the week, I had a letter in an envelope with my name spelled right and everything inside it spelled wrong. I didn't get fired, not in a way that shows up in a headline. I got told I wasn't going to be at that desk anymore. I got told I could take a post, answering a phone that never calls. It was a way of saying go. This would be the part where I'd tell you I fought. I didn't. I packed a box and Cal put it in the truck and we drove home on a 2-lane where the shoulder is as thin as a whisper. That night, he put his notebook on the kitchen table and said, "Let me look." I shook my head. He said, "Someone pushed a change." I said, "We don't do conspiracy theories in this house." He said, "We don't do pretending either." There are different kinds of grief. I was grieving something that looked like competence and smelled like burnt sugar. I'd built my whole sense of self on a floor I thought was poured concrete. And now I was standing ankle deep in a kind of mud that sucks at your boots and makes an impolite noise when you pull your foot free. If you've ever been wrong in a way that rearranges your organs, you know that kind of grief. It isn't dramatic. It's the opposite. It's washing your coffee cup and forgetting whether you washed it and washing it again. It's driving past the turn and not noticing for 10 miles. It's saying sorry to the dog for bumping his water bowl and the dog looking at you like, "Are you okay?" I should tell you that our son was 12 that summer. He was old enough to read between lines, too old to accept "it's fine" as an answer to anything. He watched me watch the sky. He watched his father copy names and dates and little arrows into a spiral notebook. He watched a quiet come into the house that didn't leave for a long time. A person has to keep going. That's not a slogan. It's a thing your body knows how to do, even when your head won't cooperate. I took a job answering phones at the county where the most dangerous call is an angry person with a property line dispute. I baked bread when flour was cheap and made soup from bones. We stopped buying the good coffee. Cow-covered council meetings and a series about a mill that hired men without asking too many questions. We paid for new boots one year and a used trombone the next. We raised a boy who could split wood without splitting his thumbnail and could carry in groceries with the milk on the bottom so it didn't crush the lettuce.
You know where this is going. You knew the minute I told you my son's name. There are only so many ways a boy like that can turn away from fire before it feels like he's turning away from his own name. I tried to reroute him with community college brochures and talk about water management and a friend who made a decent living welding railings for nice houses. He nodded at all of it. He smiled at the welding idea. And at 19, he said, "Ma, I want to do it the right way. I want to work a real crew. Not because I'm stubborn, but because I want to stand where the work is." We argued without raising our voices. We made a deal. He'd do the training and the physical and the paperwork, and we'd see how we felt. That's what he said. We. We wrote lists together. He ran with weight on his back. He learned to keep his head down in smoke and to find a leader worth following. That last part mattered to me more than any of it. The difference between life and death in 100 professions is the quality of the person you'll follow into a bad spot. By 22, he had a position on a hotshot crew that had a reputation for being clean and fast. He came home with eyes like he'd been awake in a way he'd never been awake when he slept past noon and ate cereal out of a mixing bowl. He was in love with the kind of work most people run away from, and you couldn't tell him he was wrong, because he wasn't. He was right, in his way. If you've done anything that matters, you know what that look is. It's a look that says, "This is the thing my hands were made to do." I grew an extra heart in my chest, the one that lets you be proud and terrified at the same time. If you've ever watched a person you made walk toward the thing that could take them away from you, you know how to carry two feelings without dropping either. The summer that took him was the kind that turns a math into a list of places you can't go. We had a heat wave that made birds quiet. The power company made public the list of days when they might shut everything off because a spark in the wrong place would be enough to write a different kind of headline. He came by for a shift with a bag of oranges and said, "We're going south." I said, "I don't like south." He said, "No one likes south in August." He kissed my cheek and said, "Back by Monday." I don't know how to tell you about the hours after that. I mean, I know how to tell you, but I would rather set them down as if they weren't made of anything you could touch. The radio did not bring the news. The radio brought nothing. The phone did not ring. The sky did not tell me a story. It just stayed blue in the way a sky stays blue when it decides to be cruel.
What came then wasn't a knock on the door, because that would be too theatrical for real life. It was the slowness of a familiar truck turning into the driveway, and a man with his hat in his hands, and a woman with a folder that had my name on it. They said accident and conditions and line of sight, and we're very sorry. And I nodded in a way that made them think I heard them. People think the heart breaks like a plate. Plates are sturdier than you think. It breaks more like a soap bubble, a surface that holds for a second and then disappears so completely you're left with air that knows too much. I will skip the next year because nothing I can say about it will be useful to anyone who hasn't sat at a table with 2 cups and 1 person. I will skip the way sleep came like a thief and stole the only hour you could bear to be awake. I will skip the way I left the porch light on by mistake more times than I could count, and then by habit until it stopped meaning anything. Cal did not skip it. He went the other direction. He went through it like a man who had been handed a metal detector and set loose on a beach full of scrap and coins. He stacked printed reports and maps. He filed public records requests that came back with black rectangles where the parts that mattered had been. He drew arrows on tracing paper and slid it over a map like a magician without the flourish. He and I shared a bed and a life and a temperature of grief, but he lived in that notebook like it could save him. Maybe it did for a while. You should also know that Cal's death, when it came, did not arrive like a surprise party. It arrived like a car that didn't stop. The trooper said the road was straight and the weather was clear and the guardrail was low and the angle was wrong for a tired man to have simply drifted. It's possible he fell asleep. It is also possible someone loosened a line that looks intact until the moment you ask it to hold. The file says the former, my bones say the latter. I am telling you what the file says because the file is what you can hold up in daylight. When the envelope came, I had made a small truce with the world. I had stopped believing there was anything left to find that wasn't going to make me harder and quieter than any woman has a right to be. The envelope was the color of a paper bag. There was no return address, no note inside. Just a standard cassette tape, the kind with tiny screws in each corner and a handwritten label. The label said a date I had stopped seeing in my sleep years ago on purpose. The label said a time. There is a sound that a body makes when you recognize a pattern you've been trying not to see. It is not a cry. It is a breath drawn sharp enough to cut your throat on the way in. I didn't have a way to play it. Who does anymore? I went to a thrift store where the smell of other people's basements lives forever and found a tape recorder shaped like a book with a cracked plastic window and a play button that stuck. I put fresh batteries in. I set it on my kitchen table beside a cup I did not drink and a pen I did not use. I pressed play. If you think tapes are clean, you have not listened to one that lived in a drawer for 20 years. It opened with static and a hiss like frying and a pop that made me flinch because it sounded like a snag letting go in the dark. Then my own voice, younger and tighter, reading a line of numbers. Then another voice under mine, faint at first, like someone talking from the bottom of a well. Then my own voice again, clear. Then the other voice again, stronger. The two braided together into the same space until they sat one atop the other so neatly you could miss it if you weren't one of the people who lives by lines. The voice under mine read out coordinates that weren't the ones I had. It did it with confidence. It did it like a person who had done this kind of thing more than once and had never had to write his name on a condolence card. It used a tone like a flight instructor. It used the word copy in a way no one I've ever trusted uses the word copy. I pressed stop and sat with my finger still on the plastic. Then I rewound and listened again and again. Your life is a house you keep different rooms in. I had a room labeled "It Was Me." I had wallpapered it and put a rug down and hung a picture of a ridge with an orange line that never moves. Now I could see daylight under the door because the wall wasn't a wall. It was a temporary partition someone put up in a hurry with a staple gun. You learn over years who you can call when you are about to say something that changes your story. I called one person. He and I had not spoken in 15 years because men who do the kind of thing he did don't always have the taste for quiet retirement coffee and strawberry pie. He answered on the second ring and said, "Walker." He always called me by my last name, like we were still in a room with a map and a clock. "Ray," I said. I could feel my voice trying to shake, and I told it no. "I have a tape from that night." He breathed in. "What night?" "You know what night." He was quiet long enough for me to hear a dog bark wherever he was. "Come by," he said. "Leave nothing in your car." We met at a diner near a state highway thrifted out of federal dollars in the 70s, the kind with a pie case that spins slow like it's on a Lazy Susan, and a waitress who remembers your mother, even if she doesn't. Ray looked older in the way a person looks older when they've had to hold the thing that was heavy for a long time. He had a cap on, but I could see the place his hair gave up, and his hand shook when he poured cream into his coffee. I put the tape player on the table and pressed play. He listened with his mouth closed. He put his thumb against his jaw like he used to when he was thinking and the clock was ticking and we had to make two decisions at the same time. He said, "Someone doubled your line," when the tape clicked. "They were under you." "I thought I was my own ghost," I said. He nodded toward the machine. "That voice isn't a ghost. That voice is a man with too much access." "Who?" I asked. He looked at the door. His eyes did a thing I recognized. "You want the name I always thought privately, but never said where it would count." "I want the truth," I said. He took out a paper napkin and wrote 4 letters on it. The line of his pen was a little shaky, but the letters were sharp. He folded the napkin and put it in my palm. He said, "You didn't hear that from me." And then he said, in a different voice, "I have grandchildren." I pressed that napkin in my hand until the letters imprinted on my skin. I didn't unfold it until I was in my truck. It said the name of a timber company that had been on glossy brochures for 30 years, EcoServe, and a subname I only half knew, Oriole Logging, an affiliate in the way a hand is an affiliate of an arm. If you don't work in the overlap between fire and business, you might not know what salvage logging is. I'll give you the shortest, honest version. After a burn, people with contracts come in fast to take the dead and the nearly dead, and sometimes the not dead trees, saying they're preserving value and preventing hazard. There's money in that kind of speed. There's more money if more acres burn. There are incentives in this world that don't look nice in daylight. I didn't want to believe that I had spent 20 years swallowing blame because someone else stood to make a buck from a bigger black on a map. But wanting doesn't change the math. I went home and pulled the boxes Cal left behind from the closet under the stairs. They smelled like old paper and the oil of mechanic's rag. He had copied emails onto hard copy, the way good reporters with bad budgets do. He had paper-clipped names to money amounts and drawn circles around dates like he was counting down to something. In one folder was a list he'd titled Mile Markers, but they weren't on a highway. They were on a timeline. lightning strikes, new contract dates, a purchase of used radio equipment by a subcontractor who had no business needing radios. A photograph of a man shaking hands with a county official whose smile didn't reach his eyes and may never have learned how. There was also a photograph of my husband's car after the crash, taken by a stranger who sent it to the paper because they thought they were doing a good deed, and they were. Cal had drawn a small arrow on the photo. The arrow pointed to a line under the car that did not look the way it should. I am not a mechanic, but a person who has lived long enough knows when a line is clean and when it has been cut. The next week was the kind where your days are tasks you can name, because naming is how you eat an elephant. I duplicated the tape. I wrote a note in my neat dispatch block letters and sealed it with a piece of tape because I don't like stamps that taste like anything. I mailed copies to 5 people with different vantage points. A local journalist who still works for the kind of paper Cal loved, a woman at a law office in Portland who specializes in environmental messes, the fire investigator who taught my son how to read a burn scar and understand its grammar, an old ranger who has grown too old to be scared and too honest to be quiet, and my own mailbox with my own name, because a good habit dies slower than anything. 2 days later, my back door was open when I came home. I have never owned a dog because my husband liked pets and my son liked birds, and I liked quiet. But that afternoon, I wished for teeth on my side for the first time. A chair was moved a few inches. A drawer was not the way I left it. Nothing was taken except the feeling that I had been alone in my last place. If you have ever had your home turned inside out by hands that didn't mean you well, you know the feeling. It isn't fear. It is something older. It is like the sky pressing down with its thumb. I stood in the doorway and said to the air, "You should have taken the tape when you had the chance." That's bravado. I'm not proud of that. The bravado lasted 5 minutes. Then my hand shook so hard, I put a glass down because I didn't trust myself not to drop it. I sat on the floor with my back against the cabinets and breathed until the world took its big boot off my chest. Then I stood up, washed the glass I didn't drink from, and went to see a woman named Lila, because when you are out of your depth, you look for a person with a boat. Lila told me the rules. She told me how public records can be asked for with a polite letter that is actually a crowbar if you hold it at the right angle. She told me that if I wanted to be safe, I should consider not doing any of this. She said the word safe without committing to whether it meant me or the people who got paid to want me quiet. We made a plan that looked like a web drawn by a spider who cares about neatness. We filed 3 requests and couriered 2 copies of the tape. We bought a cheap camera that I could turn on with 1 button and taught Lila how to email a link without writing the word link, because search engines read over your shoulder. This is the part where I tell you about Mark Halverson, because every story like this has a man like Mark. Handsome in a way that doesn't make you trust him. He owns suits that cost more than cars people I love have driven into the ground. He has a voice that comes with a built-in handshake. He knows the names of the people who set agendas without needing to be corrected. He will tell you he loves the forest in a way that would probably be moving if it weren't for the photocopies of contracts in my kitchen drawer. I called his office and told the truth in a way that sounded like something else. I told his assistant I was an old dispatcher with the tape and a desire to make sense of the old mess. I said I'd love to sit down with Mr. Halverson to set the record straight. People like him love records, and they love straightness when they own the ruler. He said yes, of course, happy to help. We all wish the past were tidier. He wanted me to meet him at his office, which is made of glass and steel that looks like it's pretending to be a forest. I said no, I had a bad knee and bad days, and could he humor me and come to my house? I make good coffee if he didn't mind the cheap kind. Power does not like to go where it is not comfortable. I made it sound like his visit would make him a good person in the last chapter of a story he could show his children. He agreed because ego will do what conscience will not. I woke up early the day he came and set 2 chairs at the table where I have eaten more bowls of chili than I care to admit. I placed the tape recorder in the center. I set my little camera to hum to itself. I looked at my hands and felt the way they were steady and thought how strange it is that a person can shake holding a glass in an empty house, but not shake when a man who could ruin your life is coming up the walk. Maybe the world is backwards. Maybe the backwards is the part that's real. He arrived with a smile that said he was not used to being told where to be. He looked around like he might leave a note for an assistant to refresh the paint and refinish the floor. The look told me I had chosen the right place. I poured coffee. We sat. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he said, and I gave him the smallest nod, because grief doesn't need an audience and because it was a sentence he'd practiced without earning. "I appreciate you coming," I said. "I thought you'd prefer the office." He smiled the size of the county. "I never mind meeting real folks where real life happens." He meant that in a way. Real life has always happened to people like me and never to people like him. That's the whole arrangement if you let it be. "I have a tape," I said. I put my hand on it like it might run away. "I need help understanding whether what I hear is what I think I hear, and I need a name to attach to what I think I hear." I was careful not to say his. He shifted. It was the first time he did something that wasn't a performance. It gave me the courage to press play. The hiss, my younger voice, the overlap, the confidence of a stranger. He listened the way men listen who are thinking about what their answer will sound like on a witness stand. He didn't blink much. When the tape clicked off, he fed me 2 sentences that probably work on a lot of rooms. "Analog is messy. It's easy to misremember what you think you were doing in a room with a lot going on." I nodded, like I was taking that in. Then I slid a photocopy across the table of a purchase order from Oriole Logging dated 3 months before my bad night for a batch of used frequency hopping equipment that was not appropriate for any use they could claim with a straight face. "You guys like to have backups," I said. "I get that. I was never one to say no to redundant systems. I'm old-fashioned about it. But this order, see, this is sophisticated. This is the kind of thing that can sit under someone else's channel and help them along without them knowing they've been helped." He put his hand on the paper without lowering his eyes to it. He didn't look down because he had prepared himself not to look down. He took a long drink of his coffee. Then he said the sentence that people like him always say when proof sits still enough to be read. "I don't handle technical." There are a few ways this can go next. The wrong way is me calling him a liar and him leaving righteous, and the law showing up at my door out of rhythm with how I need to sleep. The better way is me staying so close to reasonable a person could trip over me. "Of course," I said. "This is above both our heads." I smiled like a woman who meant it. "Would you be willing to listen to this other thing a friend of mine found?" I pressed play on a second tape. It wasn't a real tape. It was the first tape shifted in frequency and cleaned up by a college student named Avery, who Lila uses when she needs to drag a sound through a river and bring it up clean. The second tape sounded like the first, except the low voice under mine had its edges sharpened the way a person sharpens a knife because dull blades are dangerous for the wrong people. I let the tape run through the part where the voice made the 1-digit mistake sound like the easiest thing in the world. I let it run through the part where the man said the word copy with that little twist at the end, like a factory manager calling for a shift change. And then I pressed stop and put the room in silence. I let him breathe once. I counted 3. I said, "Mark, you've used that word copy that way.
I've heard you use that word that way at a county commission meeting when someone caught you with your hand in a cookie jar of no-bid contracts and you didn't like how the crumbs looked on your cuff. People think you need to be poetic to make a point. You don't. You need to say a thing someone will recognize later when they're lying in bed and can't get comfortable. He smiled. It was a bad smile. He put his coffee down. He leaned forward enough to tell me he was tired of being reasonable. He said, "You're making a very serious allegation that could be very expensive for you." I nodded. I don't have much for you to take. He said, "Not everything a person can lose is money." There it was. He wanted me to be afraid for my reputation, my peace, my last intact room. He wanted me to imagine a smear that would stick to my name like smoke on wool. He wanted me to know he had friends who could buy a billboard and put a photograph of my worst day on it and draw a circle around the part that hurts most. I turned the little camera 1/4 inch so the angle would show the profile of his mouth, because men like him give themselves away by the set of their lips when they threaten a woman who owns nothing but her time. "What do you want?" he asked finally.
"Not vengeance," I said, and I meant it. Vengeance is expensive and tastes like you imagined it would, but leaves you hungry. I want the record changed. I want the report amended. I want 6 names cleared of any suggestion that they were lazy or wrong. I want my son's file to say the word sabotage where it says equipment failure. I want you to tell me who else knew. I want you to tell me which of your lieutenants thought this was clever and repeated it until they forgot what it cost. And I want a sworn statement that you will give under oath that will not vanish when a photocopier breaks on the right page." He laughed. It was a real laugh. He put a hand over his eyes like this was a good joke at the end of a boring day. "You think you can pull that off with your little recorder and your little camera?" "No," I said. "I think I already did something you should worry about." He turned his face to the camera. He made a choice. It wasn't the choice that put him in prison, because people like him don't live where the bars are, not most of the time. It was the choice that made other men who do live where the bars are decide he wasn't worth protecting for free. He said, "There is no sworn statement." Then he added with the arrogance that makes the world possible for cowards, "And even if there were, no one would be foolish enough to put it on paper." The nice thing about a live link is that you don't have to be a genius with the buttons if you set it up right beforehand. Avery had set me up right. The camera had been whispering my kitchen into a handful of ears for 10 minutes. Lila's, the young reporters, the old rangers, Ray's, and one more I hadn't counted on, a state fire marshal who had taken a call from Lila that morning and decided he could route himself past my road without getting in trouble. There are ways to help that keep a person's conscience clean. There are other ways. He chose my way. The knock on the door came like something out of a play I did not audition for. The marshal stepped in with the easy authority of a person who writes on forms that become part of a permanent record. Mark's face did a thing faces do when they realize the conversation is no longer purely a performance. He stood up so fast his chair hiccuped against the floor. "You can leave," the marshal said mildly, "but before you do, I want you to know that we have the tape, the copy of the equipment order, and the letter your assistant sent to the county describing command privileges you did not have a right to borrow." The assistant. There's always an assistant who thinks they are one step from owning the world and one step from losing their job. Those are the people who keep everything. I made a note to send that person a pie with a thank you card if it didn't endanger their life. Mark didn't leave. That surprised me. He sat back down and did a thing I did not expect. He asked me for a glass of water. I poured it. His hand shook. He drank. He put the glass down. He said, "I didn't cut a brake line." It was the only sentence he cared about. He didn't even care about the tape. It's funny what will keep a man up at night. I believe you, I said, and I did. The world is bad, but it is not tidy. I think that part of it is another man's hunger. That doesn't make this part better. He looked at the marshal. I want a lawyer, he said, because no one is so dumb as to forget that line. I won't bore you with the next months, because the part of a story where paperwork does what it's supposed to do is not especially cinematic, and because I still have to live in this county and buy my bread and smile at people at the post office who gave money to men I do not respect. The short version is this. There was a grand jury. There were indictments that will read like something. There were deals cut like men bargaining for used cars at dusk. There was a sentence for a small fish that kept a big fish dry. There was a retraction in a paper no one reads that says I did not make the mistake the report said I did. You know what else there was? A meeting in a small room with fluorescent lights where a man slid a paper across a table that had the 6 names on it, and next to each name the phrase, "No fault assigned." He signed it with a pen that probably cost more than my groceries for a month. He did it without meeting my eyes. I didn't need him to. I had what I needed. I folded the paper twice and put it in my bag. I went to my truck and cried in a soft, old lady way that felt private, even in the middle of a parking lot where 2 teenagers were learning to kiss in a car with steamed windows. I drove home and took out the list of names I had written out years ago in a journal no one else would ever read because I didn't want anyone else to know my handwriting when it shakes. I read each name out loud in my kitchen. I said where they were from and who they loved and what they did on Sundays after church or instead of church. I said the name of the ridge like it was a person because it is. I said thank you, the way you say thank you to a person who hands you a thing you dropped. I took my boy's dog tag from the nail by the door. He wore it around his neck because he was practical and because the sound of that little piece of metal clinking against his zipper made me crazy in a way that made him laugh. I held it in my fist and I said what I say when the world insists on damage. I know. I know. I know. There are people who think the end of a story should restore what was lost. Those people don't get asked to do the heavy lifting. The end of my story leaves me in a small house with 1 less cup and 2 fewer boots by the door. It also leaves me holding a thread that ran under the floorboards for 20 years. I pulled it out. I showed it to the daylight. I didn't do it alone. I did it with a kid who knows how to clean a sound file, and a lawyer who reads a statute like a map, and a reporter who never took their name off the door, even when the door didn't lock right. I did it with a man from my past who still signs his name on receipts like he thinks someone is going to read it one day in a file. You don't do anything like this alone. If someone tells you they did, they are lying or they're selling something. People have asked if I'm angry. I'm polite. That's my answer. Anger was the right tool at the wrong time for a long time. Now I prefer precision. Precision is how you make a cut that heals right. Precision is how you say a name without making it about yourself. If you have borne the weight of a mistake that wasn't yours, I wish I could hand you the paper they handed me. I can't. The best I can do is tell you this. The world has rooms under it. Sometimes there's a stair you can't see until you reach your foot into the dark. There is almost always more down there than you think, but there is also sometimes a light switch. If you wait for someone to come down and turn it on for you, you will grow old in a darkness that isn't even yours. I promised you I would play you something. I'm going to do that now.
You will hear static first because the world refuses to let anything be clean for long. You will hear my voice say 308-397. You will hear a second voice say, under me and with me, 408-397. You will listen and think maybe you misheard it because the brain is a tidy animal that tries to make patterns fit. Then you will hear a word that makes the hairs on my arm stand even now. Copy. Said like a man is moving pieces across a board and can't be bothered to tell you the rules. If you're still here now, I will ask you for something small that matters. Write 2 words where you can see them. For the cruise. Put it at the top of your grocery list and on a sticky note on your fridge and in the subject line of the email you send to whoever keeps your records. Make those 2 words a kind of beacon. I wrote them on the inside cover of Cal's notebook the day I opened that envelope and saw the tape. It was the only prayer I could manage that didn't feel like lying. I will end this where I began, with a digit. 1 number kept me in a room I did not deserve to be in for 20 years. 1 number freed me. I'm not going to tell you that makes the world fair. It does not. But sometimes, if you hold the right kind of quiet, the world will give you back 1 clean line. I'm Rain. If you find me, I'll be in the kitchen, putting a paper with 6 names in a frame with a cheap metal edge that will look beautiful anyway. I'll be making coffee you won't like as much as the fancy kind, and I'll hand you a cup that tastes like something strong and simple that you can carry with one hand while the other one reaches for a light switch in a room you have been walking past your whole life.
If you're still listening, write the words we talked about somewhere small for the cruise. I will check back, not because I don't believe you, but because I want to know who is sitting with me in this hour. If you have your own tape, literal or otherwise, I hope you find the battery you need to press play. If you don't, you can borrow mine. It lives here on the table, between the cup with the chip and the map that shows a ridge that is quieter now and will be for a long, long time. My story is not tidy because our places aren't tidy. The wind does what it wants in the saddle and lies to you and tells you it's tired when it isn't. The trees don't fall when you ask them to, and sometimes the men who ordered the saws don't either. But the map remembers, and if you put your fingers to it gently, they'll tell you where the ground rises and where it falls, and where a person can stand and not be carried away. That's as close to comfort as I know how to offer. That and this last thing I will say before I press play and let the tape do the talking for me one more time.
It wasn't me. It was never me. And if you've been carrying a room inside you with a picture on the wall of a night when you think you were the worst version of yourself, open the door and see if someone stapled that wall up in a hurry when you weren't looking. If you find a window behind it, open it. Let the smoke out. Let the air in. Sit down and say the names you need to say. Then stand up, pick up your phone, and tell someone with a badge or a pen what you found. If no one answers, leave a message. If no one calls you back, find a kid who knows how to clean a sound file and a lawyer who knows how to write a letter that looks polite and behaves like a tool. Not everything is fixable, but almost everything is findable. I press play now. Hear the hiss. Hear the numbers. Hear the word that tried to carry a man's ambition into a place where it didn't belong. And when the static rushes in at the end, sit in it for a breath. Sometimes the only honest sound there is, the one that washes everything for a second, is the sound of what's not there anymore. That's how you can tell a room is ready for new paint. That's how you can tell a Ricker has told you everything it's going to say for the day. That's how you know it's time to stop talking and listen.